Welcome to the Car Sim and Race Driver Show, presented by Hugh Hattrick. Drive fast and try not to crash. Thank you so much for listening to the Car Sim and Race Driver Show. We would just like to invite you to listen to this podcast using Podcoin. Now, why might you say, should we choose Podcoin? Well, it actually pays you to listen to this podcast and any other podcast that you would like to listen to as well. You get what they call Podcoin, and that builds up over the amount of time that you listen to podcasts, and you can cash that in for Amazon vouchers or Starbucks vouchers, or you can even give it to charity. So, before we start the podcast officially, why don't you download the Podcoin app and you'll get paid to listen to this podcast and any other one you choose. Welcome to the show and let's get going. Bye just now. Welcome to the Car Sim and Race Driver Show with me, Hugh Hattrick, and a very special guest tonight, Stuart McFarlane.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Thank you.
Well, Stuart, now you are quite famous, certainly in Duns, because you were in front of thousands of people. In fact, the video that was done recently, 2 weeks ago, when Jackie Stuart visited Duns to open officially the new Jim Clark Motorsport Museum, you were the interviewer. And you managed to speak to him in front of everyone that was watching, must be a good few hundred people at least, in the boiling hot summer sun of Duns, for nearly half an hour. Without any kind of issue at all. It was just like watching Sky Sports.
Oh, gosh.
But yeah, so we've got Stuart tonight here to give us revelations of what it was like to speak to Jackie Stuart. It was a fantastic occasion. How did you enjoy? What was your feeling of the whole thing?
It was a very important day for the town, because you look at the story of this developing project. You go back to, I suppose, the very early days of 1969, and the concept of a trophy room had been devised. And of course, this is just months after Jim Clark was killed in April '68. The idea of a trophy room, the council coming forward and offering the family an opportunity to present some of Jim's trophies, some of the memorabilia he'd collected in his many races. There's a beautiful portrait painting of him that was presented and unveiled at the opening of the trophy room in '69. So you had this almost a shrine, as it was originally. That was its first incarnation. Yeah. And Jackie Stuart was there. Jackie Stuart came very early to see it, to help open it, to support it. And of course, this was a time when Jackie Stuart was going on to win his first world title. Part of the experience he had. And we've talked before about his relationship with Ken Tyrrell and Jim's relationship with Colin Chapman, and how a team manager and a driver's relationship was so different then to how it is now. Then Jackie Stuart returns in April of 1993 to open the revamped museum. He comes in 2015 to help celebrate Jim's world title number 2, the second world title he won, the Indianapolis success, his Tasman Series success, Formula 2 success, and his second place in BBC Sports Personality, all in 1965. So Jackie's there. So to have him back in the town again, it was squaring the circle. You could say it's come full circle. You have this fantastic new 1 million, 1.5 million, 1.6 million, I think to be exact, museum that houses this wonderful collection of trophies, of memories, of sounds, of visuals. And he's there to open it officially. And he's there to stand in front of the people. And you mentioned quite early that the crowds were sizable, and to talk very openly, very honestly about one of his best friends, somebody he idolised, somebody he looked up to, someone who he shared a lot of time with and learned from, and was also a confidant too. You know, it was a two-way thing.
Yeah,
Jackie's relationship with Jim Clark, very much a two-way thing. So to have him there, as you quite rightly say, it was a fantastic day. It's a fantastic day. But that's just given, you know, the viewers in that a chance to understand the history of he wasn't parachuted in for a one and only appearance. He's made private visits to the trophy room in years gone by as well. So that support has been a constant thread throughout the history of the town's way of recognising Jim Clark and his achievements.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just thought, I mean, he was very, very open. And I mean, normally you might expect an interview like that or a kind of opening ceremony to maybe last 5 or 10 minutes, and then they do this. You know, they'll take away the curtains, and there's the plaque. But you were talking to him for a good 25 minutes. At least, and he had plenty to say. It wasn't as if there was a lack of any content. I mean, you kind of felt you were getting stuff that maybe nobody else had heard. You know, it really was. It was like watching just a conversation among friends. You know, the way that he was talking to you. And I mean, you brought up things like Charter Hall and Winfield and all the relevance of, you know, the history of the Scottish Borders motor racing. And the fact we had all these incredible drivers coming to, you know, near Duns, you know, throughout the 50s and 60s, that people would be amazed at in this day and age. You know, it's almost like having Lewis Hamilton in this day and Vettel and the Formula One squad turning up at Charter Hall to do a race, you know, to do some kind of thing. It would be unheard of. But we had all the famous guys and all the world champions, many of them turn up at Charter Hall back in the 50s. You know, Duns and the Scottish Borders seems to have this incredible motorsport heritage. I don't know if it's in the water or something, but you know, I think, and with the new Jim Clark Motorsport Museum, it's gone from being just a room to this colossal building. Of course, for our viewers and readers and listeners, you know, it's got a simulator as well, which is fantastic fun. I had to go and I was black flagged on all my laps on my first run, so I'll have to have another show. That's a bad omen, if ever there was one. But you know, it was like. But no, it was great. And the funny thing was, when we were there on the opening day, you know, that we managed to get in and we had invites, and I mean, it was a huge crowd inside when Jackie Stuart was being shown round. But as he was being shown round, there was a chap sitting in the racing car, sitting in the simulator, who was the spitting image of Jim Clark. I kid you not. He was an absolute spitting image of Jim Clark. I will show you the photograph. If you'd put him in a suit, you would have thought that's his double. Unbelievable. And we had, of course, Jackie Stewart going next to the cardboard cutout. And it was quite eerie because it was kind of, you know, he was kind of looking in that picture. And you kind of thought, would Jim Clark actually want all of this hullabaloo? You know, because he was such a quiet, kind of reserved kind of person. But I think it's so good that we have something to remember him by in such a way to celebrate what he can do. And I think for the future of motorsport too, it's a great way to bring the young generation in, you know.
It is, because the trust that were very much the cornerstone, the beating heart of the creation of the Motorsport Museum, the Jim Clark Motor Museum, to give it its full name, has been supported by Heritage Lottery, has been supported by local government and the council, but the trust itself has very much been the beating heart of this.
Yeah.
And without their vision, without their determination, without their hard work, the project would not have gained any traction at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you touched on there, I think you mentioned both the nearby airfields that are intrinsically linked with motorsport in the early days of Scotland's relationship with motorsport, relatively early days. And people like Jock McBain, and they were visionaries in being able to take a post-war airfield and turn it into this fantastic circuit that people like Reg Parnell would come up and break circuit record. I think Reg Parnell still holds the Winfield.
Wow. We'll have to go to Winfield.
Yes,
I've never been.
We'll maybe do another programme from Winfield.
Yeah, that would be quite
on
funny.
Location. And Charter Hall. The interesting thing is they all had their time, and they sort of moved from Winfield to Charter Hall on to Ingliston and the 1960s, and of course the weekend when Ingliston opened in '64, you had Jackie Stuart, who was a young up-and-coming driver. You had Jim Clark, who was contesting his what would have been back-to-back world titles with John Surtees and Graham Hill and Jim. I think all in the last Grand Prix had a chance of winning. The can you imagine that? 3 different British drivers going out the last Grand Prix with a chance of winning. I'm sure that was the scenario, and it was John Surtees that eventually won it, of course, in '64. So you've got that progression of circuits and locations, but the first 2 being in the Borders was incredibly significant for the appetite for sport, and it sowed the seeds for so much success that followed. And I think it showed that there was a real a strength about the members of the early clubs that were set up in the Borders. They were determined to go places with it.
Yeah, like a Curia Cups across Scotland and things like that.
They were determined to make things happen. But got another point you raised there was his honesty. Sir Jackie Stewart's honesty on the day. He was incredibly honest, and I think he's a very relaxed person behind a microphone and on film. And not long after, again, this is something I'm sure you know about, is that ABC in Australia employed him as an interviewer. So he was actually interviewing Niki Lauda.
All right.
James Hunt. And so you're talking the mid-70s. And if you watch back footage of him talking to somebody like Niki Lauda, not only is he very relaxed in front of the camera, but his questions are from the understanding of somebody who's a driver, but worded and structured in such a way that it's a question that a member of the audience would, if not be able to ask, would want the answer to. So he understood his audience and what they would want to know and what they were interested in, and probably their knowledge base. So he didn't make it too technical. But I thought he was very, very good at that, and hence why he was used a lot by ABC.
Of course, he did a famous interview with Ayrton Senna as well, didn't he?
He did. and Ayrton Senna's, of course, he was in the
he'd been there in
room.
1991. But I remember that one because Jackie Stewart quite triggered Ayrton Senna, if that was the term you could use back then, because he was challenging him on his taking off of Prost. Back in 1990, and Senna was not too pleased. But then I think it was in 91 or 92 he admitted that was what he was set out to do, and that was that. But again, Senna, Jim Clark was his hero, and that's why he came up to see the room. And I'll never forget that picture of him signing the book and being up there.
And I think that the story goes that Senna's arrival was almost at the closing time of the museum, so the museum's opening was extended for the private visit of Ayrton Senna. That particular day.
It would have been amazing to turn up and to see you have to be visiting Duns and you're ushered out when this man comes in, But because I saw him in '93, not long after that, when he the one Grand Prix I'd been to was at Donington, and I saw him win at the European Grand Prix in incredible conditions, and really was the most amazing lap. We were at the Donington Loop, and by the time he came through, he was already in second place, and he was just a little bit behind Prost. And by the time he came back into view, he'd overtaken Prost, and he'd gone from something like 6th place at the start up to, I think it was 5th, but then he went down to 6th at the first corner, and then he came back and he was 1st by the end of the lap 1. So an incredible experience. But
there is a man who was idolised to an incredible level in Brazil. He touched the nation in a similar way to Pelé. Jairzinho, and these wonderful footballers of the late 60s and early 70s, or Garrincha, or that from a slightly earlier era. Ayrton Senna, and gosh, you've had some incredibly talented drivers from South America, Latin America, and Brazil in particular. Nelson Piquet and people like that.
Wasn't it?
Now Emerson Fittipaldi, 2-time world champion. You could put Sir Jackie Stewart and Emerson Fittipaldi together, and they could pass off as being cousins. Maybe not brothers, but there's
true.
a similarity there.
Definitely.
They have, and of course Emerson Fittipaldi is famous for not drinking the milk after the Indy 500 win. He was promoting his orange juice at the time, so he rather upset the organisers by not going with tradition and consuming milk, but promoting the orange. It was about 91 or 93 because he had the success twice as he did with the 2 world titles. So yes, I mean, and of course, fortunately, Emerson is still very much with us. But when Senna was killed, it was the mourning in Brazil was incredible.
Well, I mean, it was millions of people lined the streets. I mean, I'll never forget that day because I never saw it on TV. I was actually out. I had a conference to go to, so I had to leave, and I was listening to it on the radio. And literally, I heard obviously the accident on radio. It was Radio 5 Live at the time that was covering it, and all they had said was there'd been a big accident. But at that point I had to go, and I was expecting to hear later on that, well, that was fine, he was out of that race. And then I asked one of my friends when I got to the conference, had they heard any more? And they just said, oh, he'd been taken to hospital. And I thought, oh. And then of course I got back later on about 9 o'clock that night. In fact, it was Jackie Stuart who was on Radio 5 Live, because in my flat I didn't have a TV at the time. I couldn't afford a television. I was not long out of school. And it was Jackie Stewart who was being interviewed on Radio 5 Live. And I knew at that point, with his in his voice, that he had died, that something horrendous had happened. And of course, we'd had the death of Roland Ratzenberger the day before. But I had forgotten about that, and the fact that it brings it around to Jackie Stewart, that he was being asked, what happens now when you lose a driver of that kind of calibre. But no, it was a shock, and it took a long time for people to kind of get going again, and be even because motor racing, we come to think that people like Senna were unbreakable, weren't they? With his and he was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, at that time. Either love him or hate him. I was a Mansell fan, so you were kind of rooting for Mansell, but if Senna did well and Mansell was out, you kind of wanted him to win, But it was an incredible thing. But no, I think that's where motorsport is so. It does get your passion. And you do relate to the drivers, because you especially when in the old days they would do a lot more videos where you'd buy the videos and they would really tell you their kind of life story, and they don't really do that so much now, But I think but maybe with what Jackie had said at the opening, it was kind of a little bit like that, because you got the real story of where he had been and what his life was like.
And you got more than an impression that it was to some degree gladiatorial. In terms of the dangers, they were competing in these phenomenally fast but incredibly fragile vehicles, the shells of them, and the amount of fuel that they were carrying at any one time. And the story when he relayed a particular occasion where he was driving in quite horrendous conditions, and the race was completed, and there was a number of casualties in drivers going off track rather than a race with a fatality. And you had a scenario where Jim Clark approaches Jackie and says, "Now, you okay?" Because I think it was a race he eventually won, that it was in his mind to make sure that his friends were round safely. And the relationship between Jackie Stewart, Jim Clark, the third member of that party was Graham Hill. And an occasion where Jackie, as he was then, plain old Jackie, in his early days, coming careering off a track, steering wheel traps his legs, there's fuel spilling out of the vehicle. The first person on the scene to help him is Graham Hill.
Goodness,
and he rips the steering wheel off, and because his attitude was, to hell with the race, he's my friend. And it's life was far more important. But you didn't have the stewards, you didn't have the emergency services, you didn't have the protocol that. So Jackie was very much at the forefront of driving forward for safety for drivers and for spectators.
I mean, it was so dangerous. I mean, somebody put on a video of Jim Clark actually crashing at Brands Hatch, and he runs wide and he hits a hay bale and it goes right up and comes down, and it's quite a dramatic accident. I mean, he gets out straight away, and the straw's gone everywhere, and eventually there's a few marshals running around, but the race just carries on at full speed, and it's absolutely lethal, and there's really no protection for anybody, But it shows you that in those days it was kind of crazy, and you know, no wonder people got killed, because I mean it just wasn't particularly run in the interests of preserving life.
No.
It was, as you say, a gladiatorial kind of event.
It was. There was no obviously confrontation or no physical combat, but the dangers were still so plain to see, and that would weigh heavily, incredibly heavily, on family members and partners, as well as the drivers themselves.
Because they wave them off
as time went on. For the number of drivers and friends that Sir Jackie lost in the time that he was in Formula One was incredible, and incredibly sad, and to have Joachim Rindt as a posthumous world champion. He died before it was really officially his title in 1970. I mean, to have circumstances like that you think that wasn't that long ago.
It
was some time ago, but it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And you think that, and you had a huge audience even then. Limited television, limited exposure, but you still had, through Pathy News and that, showing cinema footage, and I mean, they were going to mass audience.
I wonder if it would have been covered on radio in those days.
Yes.
Would it have been done live? Do you think? I don't know if they had
But by the mid '60s, a lot was covered. It in some ways didn't have the same restrictions that you maybe had with a lot of live football. At one time you had the last 20 minutes of a game live, and then with a club game, and then in Scotland for a long time it was the last 5 minutes of the first half and all of the second half. But I think the Radio 4, BBC Radio 4, if anybody's interested, and still have available to listen back to, a very interesting programme presented by Matthew Paris. And it's a discussion with three people. Matthew Paris was the presenter, and he openly admits in the beginning that motorsport isn't something that he has a great understanding of, historically or modern day. But the subject around the broadcast was Colin Chapman. And it begins with some radio. I'm sure it is radio rather than television commentary.
Because I was listening recently to it was a Murray Walker interview from F1's Beyond the Grid podcast, which was very, very good actually. They go into a lot of detail. But now Murray's 95, but he didn't actually start full time with the BBC until he had retired his job in advertising. So he was 60 when he actually started his proper full time career with the BBC for Grand Prix coverage, and that's incredible, because you just think he's been doing it since the 50s. In fact, about 47 or 48, I think it was, when he first started.
A Mars a day, was that one of his?
Well, that was the big slogan claim, but I think it was one of his colleagues, according to the podcast, I think it was one of his colleagues who did that, but he did a few others as well. But I mean, Murray was the one. I mean, it was Murray Walker and James Hunt. It was just incredible, and it was Philip Alliot driving, I think it was at a McLaren or something, or some old car, and James Hunt, it was at the Portuguese Grand Prix, and Alliot crashed and nearly took out Mansell in the process, and narrowly missed him. And then James Hunt comes out and says, and there's Alliot, who always crashes anyway, having another job, having another go. And it was like, it was brilliant. It was absolute classic, And of course, James Hunt was the person who broke the story that Ayrton Senna would drive for Williams for free. Ayrton had asked him to drop that bombshell halfway through the build-up in the French Grand Prix. And so midway through, I remember, because I had recorded it live on video, and I played it back, and I had the whole build up, the whole coverage. I think it was 90. Was it 92? I think it was 92. Yeah, it must have been 92, because Prost went there in 93, and that's when Senna had to drive for McLaren Ford, and he was obviously wanting to drive for Williams, and he basically said he would drive for Williams for free if they were going to do it. So. And of course everything stopped, It was the way. So you don't really get that nowadays. I mean, it's quite incredible. But what do you think? I mean, for going back to what we now have at the Jim Clark Motorsport Museum, and you've got the library, you've been given the jacket, or you maybe have to buy the jacket, but
you've got the hoodie
and the whole thing.
On,
What do you think the future is for motorsport in the Borders? Do you think that there is, is it going anywhere? I mean, obviously we've got places like Knockhill, but it's still quite small. You know, it's maybe not on the same kind of standard as the likes of Silverstone and all these, you know, bigger circuits and things like that, or even Donington and Brands Hatch. Do you think that we can do something in Scotland to try and help, you know, do more for motorsport?
I think individually there's always going to be talent coming through.
Yeah.
I think if it's in terms of facilities and an infrastructure and a track that is needed, then it does come down to pound, shilling and pence and generating the money.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's trying to get the balance between looking at the history and the sort of heritage and looking ahead to the future and the locations and where you could
Actually
you know,
put it.
actually put it. You know, would there ever be a revival of Charter Hall, for example?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
as
probably
a circuit,
yeah.
it's a really interesting circuit to drive around or to watch somebody drive around.
Yeah,
It certainly is.
There's lots of space there. I think you could make a lot of new track. You know, I think you could do a lot with it and make it spectacular.
I think it depends. It depends, I suppose, on the powers that be and their particular visions for motorsport. I know that the Jim Clark Trust are very much looking at the future and looking to sort of try and promote motorsport and aspects of motorsport, because they would very much like to see more people from the area get involved in at some level.
Yeah.
In this going forward. But it is interesting because you do look at Charter Hall and you do sometimes think, what if? What if there was some bit? But again, it would take a lot of money and a lot of time to revive, and then obviously you would need to ensure that there would be sufficient activity on the track.
Yeah, the infrastructure around it to make it work.
To make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
While you've got Knockhill not too far away, offering so much as well, of course.
Well, I looked into what it costs to build a Formula One circuit, just out of interest.
Yes.
You know what you do when that's the power of the internet for you when you have a bit of time on your hands. And seemingly now, to get FIA standard, your pit building, the average cost of a new pit building is £60 million. Which actually I thought isn't actually that much when you think of what they do and how big they are. I mean, there were fantastic shots of Monza on Sunday there, and you think how long that pit building is and all the rest of it. And to build the track, or to lay the tarmac on the track for a kind of 3 mile circuit is around about £60 million as well. I think what costs is all the kind of big grandstands. If you've got like these super duper modern grandstands, it's quite expensive. If they're not quite to that standard, it's a bit less. But no, I love what they've done at Mexico. You know, when they have the kind of they have the infield section at Mexico, when the cars come in and they've got these very, very high grandstands. It's kind of like a football stadium, and they come straight in through the kind of hairpin bends. And you know, I think that would be the way to go if they were going to do that at Charter Hall. You need something like an amphitheatre to make it all kind of work and do it properly. But no, I think it would be incredible. And for the heritage we have in Scotland and especially in the borders, it would be amazing. You know, that,
I mean, it certainly has its place cemented in Scottish motorsport with what it achieved in the past in terms of attracting huge crowds and audiences and having high profile drivers drive on the circuit. I suppose it is finding that balance between the love and the heritage of something and trying to revive that and looking at what is the future and what is sustainable and what works and the location of something, and as you mentioned, locating it so it is near a wide transport infrastructure. It's not just airports.
We need a dual carriageway on the A1. Up to from Newcastle to Berwick at least.
And another 2 lanes each way in the Edinburgh bypass. Yes,
exactly. Yes, and from Berwick to Edinburgh would be quite good. But I thought if it cuts through via Greenlaw in that area, the old A6 Stade, is it, whatever road it is that goes through past Greenlaw, that would be a perfect dual carriageway because it's quite easy to do. Not much land to buy off and get it all sorted, and that's the thing. But no, you can see I'm kind of, that's my dream idea of we just need about 300 million quid. So we'll see how we go. But no, I think it's amazing, and I have to say you did a phenomenal job talking to Jackie for
thank
at
you
least
very
half an
much.
hour. And I mean, I think to everyone who saw that, they thought, "Wow, that is," they would think you were from Sky or from one of these programs because really of what you're doing. And
No, just an enthusiastic amateur.
no, but well, you did a very, very, very good job, and I mean, your knowledge. I mean, that was one of the questions I was actually going to ask you. I mean, you know every detail of motorsport history, in terms of Jackie Stewart, Jim Clark, and how did you learn all of that? Was it just your own personal research, or is it meeting a lot of the guys involved, or what's been?
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
A little bit of both. It's just it's sometimes finding a source that can, within a short space, whether it be a piece of audio or an article, it can contain a lot of information.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily reading a sizable piece and just extracting a paragraph.
Yeah.
Sometimes some articles can contain a huge amount, and what you often find as well is you've got that sort of spider effect, where you have a piece of information, you're then attracted to go somewhere to find out more about the individual that's being referred to, and then that then leads you on to somewhere else and something else. So you it's almost you leapfrog on, or you move forward, and you can digress away in all different directions. And that I find I've got at home, not all the time, but at times I've got enough time to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So be able to look at an individual, but allow myself to be distracted and go off in a different direction, and look at other sports. And I was, or not, when I say other sports, other forms of motorsport.
Yeah.
I was talking the other night to a chap who was a co-driver for a while, and we were talking about rallying in the 1970s and rally coverage in the 1970s. The Scottish Rally Championship in the 1970s, and Harry Vatanen and some of the absolute top drivers.
Oh yeah, they were quite something. Yeah.
How was it covered then? So it was covered on BBC, what is now Reporting Scotland. There would be Mary Marcus would always have a segment about the Scottish Rally Championship. That the rally was ongoing. You would have the quirky and a very eclectic mix of sports on World of Sport on a Saturday. The rival to Grandstand.
Right.
But in the early 80s, it would always dedicate half an hour on the Saturday on terrestrial TV to the Scottish Rally Championship or the Scottish Rally.
When it was on, because they had like Rally Report.
They had
Rally Report,
yes.
which had that great music on it.
Yes.
And I used to I put it on my iTunes a wee while ago, and the funny thing was I once played it in front of my mother-in-law. I'd been helping her move house, and we were in a hire van, and I forgot that it was on. I'd had it on the Bluetooth thing, and the first thing that comes on is like and it was icy all round. It was in January when we moved her, and she said, "What music is that?" And I said, "It's the rally music." You better put your seatbelt on. What about all my luggage? It was like, so we had a great time. But no, they had real atmosphere because you had Tony Mason, wasn't it? And I don't know, Murray Walker did bits and pieces of that, but I know Tony Mason did it, and a few others did it.
Tony Mason was again, somebody who I've been lucky enough to meet Tony. In fact, I'll be 20 years ago.
Is he still alive?
I think yes. I think he's still with us as we speak just now. He was at the Jim Clark Rally in 1999, and I remember talking to him at the Lantern Water Splash on the evening stage. And again, he was, I think, again, if memory serves correct, co-driver to Roger Clark about 1973.
Yes, and Tiffany Dale.
And
they would do
Tiffany
Top
Dale,
Gear rallies, and they won them. They won one once, but.
So yes, these characters would spring up, and you would just take nuggets of information from them. You would go on, you'd find an article that was well written and detailed, and it was compact with a lot of information in there. And then there's others where you would, spread yourself across different internet pages and that, and find out information. That with the internet certainly made it an awful lot easier than it perhaps would have been otherwise. And I've been a huge beneficiary of many websites that are maybe dedicated to an individual sports personality or a club or an organisation or that. So it's that's helped. But I think it's you just you're always sort of open and ready to consume information and try and retain that. The difficulty is to try and retain it and then use it without forcing it out. And you know, just drop in little snippets or facts, or if you're doing an interview, prod with a you know a question or a point that maybe contains some information that the interview can then latch onto and then take off with it.
So who would be, here's a question for you, if you could interview one of the current kind of Formula One drivers, who would be one that you think would be quite interesting and quite fun to do? You're walking past the Jim Clark room one day and along turns up a limo and out pops the driver.
Well,
and you just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
I have to say that I would be very interested to see and hear Lewis Hamilton's response to it.
That would be the thing. If he came, that would be something.
You know, because you know he's created some history in very recent times. In sort of British motorsporting terms, but to hear him and because he clearly has a huge respect and a great understanding for drivers, particularly the British drivers from the past. So I'd be hard pushed, you know, if for that very reason I was given the opportunity to pick one. It might be, you know, a rather predictable sort of way to go with it. And I mean, Charles Leclerc, it'll be interesting to see how he goes on and what he makes of things at the moment.
But I mean, the racing's been fantastic. The last 5 or 6 races, really, apart from France. After that was brilliant. We had some good races before then. But
even Monaco, when you consider the situation with Lewis Hamilton's tyres.
He hung on.
He did hang on. He was great. There was a lot of anxiety in his voice when he was relaying back on the radio to the team about the tyre selection. But he did, and he maybe a Lewis Hamilton of not yesteryear but of an earlier age would have
maybe struggled to have done that.
But it was a good circuit also for that necessarily to happen because of the difficulty with the overtaking. Now you're talking there about reviving something. Monaco is a treasured race and a treasured occasion. It's one of the jewels in the crown. I don't know if you'd ever get a Monaco starting now that would run for 70, 80, 90 years in a city. But to have that history going back. I want to get your thoughts on something here actually. This is something I've spoke to a few people about, and I don't know what the viewers and listeners will think about this, but one of the drivers from this in some respects, now be careful how I word this, it was a golden age in some respects. Now it had the horrors of some horrendous deaths and that, but there was also, as Jackie Stuart sort of referred to, that there was that glamour and the magic to it, but there was the other side. It was a Jekyll and Hyde sport. You had the horrors of the accidents, but you had the glamour and the pizzazz beginning to show itself in motorsport in the 60s. Graham Hill. If Graham Hill was a Scot, given what he'd achieved, how would Scotland recognise Graham Hill? Because to me, Graham Hill's achievements, standing alongside Jackie Stuart, standing alongside Jim Clark, I don't think his achievements have been appreciated and shown in the way that they perhaps should have done, in the way that there's maybe a bit more in Scotland. Maybe it's a smaller country, a smaller nation, but when you consider what he achieved,
two World Championships,
to win the 62, 68, to win Indianapolis in 66, to win Le Mans, and to win boss Monaco, Monaco. He was a king. Him and Prince Rainier were, they were the almost the dream team. To have all that success.
I mean, how many British World Champions were there in the 60s in Formula One?
Well, you had four. I think you had four. But you had five in all, because
62 for Graham Hill.
62 for Graham Hill, 63 and 5 for Jim Clark. John Surtees was 64.
So, I mean,
Jackie was 69. Mike Hawthorne was 58. And there was the chap Hill in, not Graham Hill, was it? There was another one. I think I'm missing one from. I'm wondering if I'm missing one out in that order. People will be shouting at us now. But just off there, you're looking at that.
That was a shoot when you think like 4 or 5 at least British world champions, year in, year out, kind of, which is really quite incredible.
Yeah.
No, it was an incredible era, and I think, as you say, he's kind of downplayed.
Yeah.
I think even Damon Hill was downplayed when you think. I mean, he won it in '96. It was quite a dominant season, but in '94 when he was against Schumacher. All of that was a huge race. I mean, his epic victory in Japan in the wet when it was they stopped the race and then it was in 2 parts and he beat Schumacher by I think it was about a second in the end. But nobody knew until he crossed the line exactly what it was going to be like, And he stayed ahead of Schumacher in horrendous conditions. So I think, they're definitely. I was a big Damon Hill fan, and it was quite a time to see him drive in that, But it's an incredible sport. I think the 80s as well was amazing. When you always remember Mansell's blowout in Adelaide in '86 when his tyre blew and that was it.
And Murray Walker almost blew with it.
Mansell, and he's fighting for control. It was incredible. And that was one of the first races I ever watched on TV, and that was it had been recorded because it was the middle of the night or whenever it was live and from Adelaide. And I remember watching it in the morning, and my mum and dad allowed me to record it, and I couldn't believe this was incredible watching it all. These old fuzzy onboard shots, but when you see the onboard shots in the '60s and the '70s and that on these cars that were fighting along and we're just the fuel tank was basically in between their legs. It was incredibly dangerous. And you think now it's so much safer. And although there was a horrendous accident with poor Anton Hubert, who was killed in the Formula 2 race back in Belgium, but it takes a kind of freak accident now to really kind of cause that, rather because they are so well run and the tracks are very, very carefully designed, But no, it's an incredible sport, and talking about it with you tonight has been absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure for our listeners and viewers, if you have any questions, you can email us at podcast@cardealadvisor.co.uk. If you have any questions for Stuart, I will pass them on once we receive them. But it's been really, really fantastic to speak to you tonight, Stuart.
Thank you.
I was going to say,
very much.
I don't know how sometimes you finish with a question and you say what would be your question for our viewers, or how you see motorsport developing in Scotland. But I think, as you say, that as the talent comes up, they go through the ranks, and then Scotland does seem to have a thing about making great drivers. So hopefully that will continue, and we'll see how it goes. Also, sim racing. Sim racing is the thing now with simulators. So I would like eventually to get a centre in Duns and have a proper number of sims.
I've heard you talking about that before.
Yeah, that is my long-term goal. So hopefully I might not be able to raise 300 million for a track, but I might be able to raise 300 quid for a sim. But it was like, but it might be a bit of a Top Gear special, that one, I think.
You were asking me, do I have a question for the listeners? I would be interested to see what the listeners and viewers have to say about Graham Hill.
That could be our question.
Graham Hill's achievements fully appreciated and fully recognised. Maybe not so much appreciated, because I'm sure they were. But maybe recognised. Has he been recognised in the way he deserves? Because I just feel that Jim Clark and the family and the trust have done so much and the town and the borders and Scottish sport. But I feel that Graham Hill's achievement is phenomenal as well. And as you were saying, to have this conveyor belt of incredible talent, and to have Graham Hill and Jim Clark in the same team in '68.
It's fantastic. It's really,
Jim Clark wins on New Year's Day in South Africa. '68, and Graham goes on and wins the world title that year after Jim's death.
And that must have been horrendous. But no, that's the thing. Well, we'll end on a positive note.
Yes,
thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you to all our listeners and viewers. You've been watching and listening. to the Car, Sim and Race Driver Show with me, Hugh Hattrick, and my very special guest and commentator extraordinaire, Stuart McFarlane. You can hear him, is it Radio Borders?
Radio Borders, and I'm heading off to Japan.
Japan?
Heading off to Japan.
Oh, for the World Cup?
Rugby World Cup, yes.
Fantastic.
So, yes,
wow.
I'm off there. So that's
brilliant.
Another experience.
Yeah, that'll be good. Hopefully Scotland can come back with a good few bits of silverware there. That would be
and
nice.
some plaudits.
Yes, that would be good.
Come back with plaudits.
They've got to get out of the group final stages again to the semi-finals and hopefully further up. That would be fantastic. But take care and remember our motto: drive fast and try not to crash. See you next week. Bye-bye.
There we go.
At cardioadvisor.co.uk, we can help you save thousands of pounds on your next new car or van. And we can also source second-hand cars as well. And we can save you money on car rental, whether it be in the UK and abroad. Just click our rental link on the website. And we'll give you a free gift if you trade in your car with We Buy Any Car using our special website link. So go to the website now and see how much you can save. And it's back to the show. Thanks for listening. For more information, go to cardioadvisor.co.uk and you can see all the special offers that we have on the website. And remember, we have our YouTube channel, which is at Hugh Hattrick, and also we have our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Anchor FM. And if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to our shows, or you can donate every month for just £1. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.